So for the second time in my life, I have finished reading the Inheritance Cycle four-book series, which is I'm not going to remember the name of the third book. I don't think it's Aragon, Brisingir, Aragon, Brisingir. I truthfully cannot remember the name of the third book. Aragon, Brisingir. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. Um, I can't recall. I mean, it's got Gladiator on the front, I'm pretty sure, right? Am I wrong about that? Cause I'm pretty sure. Oh, okay. I just realized I thought that the dragon on the front of the fourth book, also spoilers, of course, for the whole series. I'm about to spoil everything. Um, Actually, let me start with if you haven't read this series. Basically, the inheritance cycle, which starts with the book Aragon, is about a young man, a young teenager man, who gets caught up in an adventure in a young adult style way, where, he's unremarkable at first, but then things change all of a sudden, and he's swept up into high adventure, and he meets a beautiful woman, and he faces uh, evil enemies, and he meets powerful allies, and he has all these great experiences, these wondrous experiences in faraway places, and he grows in power until he's more powerful than anyone, basically. Um, because it's a fantasy series, so he uses a sword and he rides a dragon and he uses magic. The magic in this series is the most interesting and fun magic system that I have ever read about in any fiction, and I have not read a lot of fiction, so that's not a very meaningful statement. But it's better than Harry Potter magic. It's better than Game of Thrones magic. It's better than Lord of the Rings magic. It's um I wouldn't say it's as wondrous as Narnia magic. Um, but the way that it's definitely not as wondrous as other systems because part of their what makes them wondrous is the mystery, and you're not sure how the magic works. But in Aragon, usually you know the rules of the magic and what Aragon can do and what his enemies can do. And it's pretty rare that something that matters or is important in any way is a great mystery in how it's working. Um, but Aragon is the Inheritance Cycle series, rather, is a very enjoyable, decent young adult, not too dark, kind of dark sometimes, but not too dark. Like very gory is basically as dark as it gets. Very gory and certain implications of dark things. But it's not like a Game of Thrones where there's almost no holds barred. I don't think I used that phrase correctly, or at least I don't know what it means. Um, Even in a thing like Game of Thrones, there's the favorite characters who are pretty much destined to live and to succeed, as far as I can tell. I think it's interesting how a lot of times in fiction there's certain characters that are invented just to die, so that the more important characters don't have to die. um, initially when I finished this series and I wanted to do an audio on it, I've done a few, um, but I had all these criticisms I wanted to talk about, and it honestly feels wrong to do that now that I just finished it because the ending was pretty much just it wasn't quite as impactful as the first time that I read it. And here's where I'll get into the spoilers. Aragon leaves his homeland, the continent, forever, and he's fated to never return. So he goes off in like a Lord of the Rings style. He sails across the sea into lands unknown. Um, and I always thought that ending really stuck out to me. It actually stuck out to me more than the death of the main villain because the entire time I was reading this series for the second time, because I read this series as a teenager and I read it again now. I could not remember how the main villain Galbatorix died. I couldn't remember how they defeated him. And I kind of knew that it was going to be um something like something that you wouldn't be able to predict. Like it wouldn't be any of the factors um that we'd been introduced to. It would be something that was going to be pulled out of the hat at the last moment. And it kind of was. Kind of part of it wasn't because he still followed the rules. Aragon still followed the rules of magic. Um, but what happened, you just really couldn't have predicted it unless if you were the author yourself, I think. Because there were so many different ways you could have just imagined it happening, but at the same time, as a reader, not the author, not the creator, you he they the heroes all get into that situation where they're all at the mercy of the villain, and you can't imagine any way they possibly can get out. But of course, the creator can because he is the one who creates everything. Um, that might have sounded like a criticism, but it really wasn't, because it was still a good ending. Um, and it really couldn't have been done much better than it was, I think. Um, I thought it was very a fitting end to the villain, I think. Like very good, honestly. An enjoyable read. It might have been I don't know. I always thought that Galbatorix was a very cool villain. Like one of my favorite villains in fiction actually because of how powerful he was. Um it was just insane levels of power. And there was different details about the book series that I forgot. I forgot, or at least I never realized how persuasive a lot of Galbatorix's arguments were. It's interesting how basically in this last book when they meet Galbatorix, he spends most of his time when once they meet him, um, the majority of his actions when he's in the same room with the other characters is just him trying to verbally um, just just make an argument for why they should join his side. And the thing is I mean he does threaten them and he holds them with magic, but the whole time he's not trying to kill them. And it's not necessarily that he's doing that out of mercy. At least it doesn't seem that way. Because he's a very cruel and hard ruler. But it's still interesting that if you look at the one situation itself where the heroes and the villain meet in the throne room, and a little bit before that when he had captured Nasuda and he had her in his torture chamber. Most of the time he's just not even using magic to try to alter their thinking or anything. He's just trying to persuade them with his words to join him and that he's not as bad as people think he is. Um, and his arguments were not even terrible. They were honestly pretty persuasive. It's just all of his actions outside of those arguments, um, or at least the methods he used to run his kingdom, were very cruel. If he hadn't been such a cruel ruler, if he had cared more about people's lives and their quality of their lives, then nobody would have ever overthrown Galbatorix. It's the same sort of thing in the Hunger Games, where all they would have had to do if the capital wanted to control people, and all Galbatorix would have had to do if he wanted to control people more, was just be nicer to people, and then nobody would have overthrown them. It's kind of confusing when villains want all this power and it causes them to be so incredibly cruel. Because when you have magic like Galbatorix has, or if you're the capital, I mean, you could still oppress people and tax them heavily and kill them and maybe even torture some of them, but you just can't go too far. Like in the Hunger Games, the way they went too far was by running the Hunger Games, which enraged people, because it was this huge spectacle that they were putting on TV, where their children were dying. I don't really know exactly what happened to the people in the inheritance cycle that caused them to rebel. It's not really explained exactly, except that there are things like slavery in Galbatorix's kingdom. Um, but it's honestly not really explained what exactly he did wrong so much. I mean, it's obvious that he's not a good guy. He's a cruel ruler. That's the word I'm going to keep using because he tortures people and he does what's necessary for him to secure his power. And he has slaves and he uses evil creatures and evil means to get what he wants. But on the whole, if you were just an average citizen, um, most of the time living in his empire, probably it doesn't seem like it was that bad. Um, yeah, you had the Razak, the which were vile, disgusting servants. Um, and you had their sorcerers who did weird things during the war, like make it so that their soldiers couldn't feel pain. Which is weird, but they did that to their own soldiers. It's not like they were doing that to the Varden, which are the rebels. And they did do horrible things to the Varden because I mean the Varden did horrible things to them. Um, Everyone was committing these atrocities. And you kind of think like, if the Varden hadn't rebelled, how bad would have things really been? Um, if the Varden hadn't rebelled, the dragon eggs would have never gone to Carvajal, and the Razak would have never gone to fetch them. Maybe if the Varden hadn't rebelled, Galbatorix would have seen no reason to allow any Razak to live, and he would have slain them. But instead, he figured they would be useful tools against the rebellion, and so he enslaved them. Um, I don't really know if that's exactly how things went down. I don't remember exactly what Galbatorix said about the Razak and what the Razak said about him. But I do believe, um, I seem to recall that he almost killed them, but then he decided against it. Like he almost destroyed the Razak. And he also tried to destroy the Urgals, which is something that the other races, at least in the first parts of the book series, they would have wanted to do as well. If they had the power, many a citizen of Alagacia would have pressed a button that killed every Urgal in existence. So you're kind of just, when you look at how the heroes confronted Galbatorix, he stops them with non-lethal, non-harmful magic, at least once they break into his throne room. I mean, they are attacking, so he does, like, put up all these magical defenses in his own castle, by the way. Basically, I'm just trying to see things from Galbatorix's point of view, and I'm wondering how much the author did this on purpose, but basically they get into the throne room and the heroes are not willing to negotiate with Galbatorix at all. And he tries to have a long discussion with them, but none of them are actually willing to enter into a dialogue about the ethics of things that he's done, or to argue really any points whatsoever, or to even try to be like, just to ask him like, hey, look, if you do this or that, or if you swear that you'll do better in the future, then I'll swear fealty to you, Galbatorix. You know, they just immediately try to kill him. And even when he's trying to talk to them, and he's trying to have a discussion with them, um, they are trying to kill him. And they won't listen, and they won't verbally articulate any reasons that they're fighting instead of just talking. I think that it would have been more interesting to me personally if they had entered into a very long dialogue in the throne room that lasted for many chapters about the things that just about an argument for why they were resisting Galbatorix, because Galbatorix acknowledges that in the past he did evil things, but now his goals are actually almost noble, even if you disagree with certain things he's doing. He literally, his main goal, he says, and it seems like he's telling the truth, is that he wants to make it so that spellcasters and magicians are not as powerful as they would be, because they can oppress people with their power, and normal people can't do anything about it. And so Galbatorix, he's already in this position of massive power as a rider of a dragon and a magician of unsurpassed power. And so he's the one that has this idea, and of course someone has to be in charge of this. Someone has to govern this, um, and enforce these rules and make this all happen. And so he just figures, well, why not himself? Why not he be the one that brings this about? And that's a pretty logical thing. Um, that's how all the other systems of government work in the real world, and it's how it works in the world of Aragon. You put somebody in charge, and they have more power than the other people, and that's just an unavoidable thing. And no amount of ideals is going to change that. Every now and then you're going to have a good leader, and every now and then you're going to have a bad leader. And Galbatorix acknowledges the things that he did in the past were not good. At least at one point when he's talking to Aromas and Gladier, he says, you guys should join me, and we'll make the world peaceful. We'll fix things. And he says, I regret the things that I did. But from his point of view, back then, he was just overthrowing the authority that the writers had. Um, and it's never really explained exactly why so many of the writers actually rebelled against the other writers and dragons. Why were so many willing to do that? There's hints at why this happened, but it's not really described in any way except very neutrally. There's not really any detail. It's just that characters will say things like, some of the writers that betrayed them wanted power, some of them wanted revenge for perceived wrongs, that sort of thing. And we don't really know what happened in the past. Um, we don't even really, like, you could trust Aromas and Gladier to some extent, and the other characters. But the truth is, pretty much every piece of history that was told to Aragon, and then he learned about all these events, I don't think it, I mean, I guess, even if it was told to him in the ancient language, that doesn't necessarily mean when somebody says something in the ancient language, all it means is that they believe what they're saying is true. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it is or that's the way it happened. So, I'm not trying to argue that Galbatorix was a good guy, because it's obvious that he is a villain, but it's kind of like the way I've looked at Half-Life 2. Because if you look at Half-Life 2 from a certain perspective, Breen is trying to save humanity, it seems like. And, it's like every time in fiction now, when I see an empire that is controlling everything, um, I just kind of have to wonder, does the good outweigh the bad? With the exception of something like the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, it's so awful, like how the citizens are treated and the games themselves and everything. It's you just obviously need to rebel. Um, but in something like Star Wars, it's almost barely ever explained or shown why the Empire is bad. The only thing that I can think of is that the Empire is a human only thing and that they're racist and that they have slaves basically. And that's basically that's basically it. And it's like you couldn't make an empire that was bad, so you just had to make them racist. You couldn't figure out a way that they were actually bad. So you just had to make them all racist. Okay. And of course, you make the people, Darth Vader and the Emperor, you just make them very evil, obviously, right? Which is fine, of course. But the whole thing is you have to wonder if the Empire as a whole, you know, would it really be that bad? Because in the fiction, it's always portrayed as that there's basically this spiritual problem with the Empire in Star Wars. It's not really so much in a problem of ideology or a problem of the Order itself. It's just that everybody in the Empire is a huge jerk. So obviously you have to rebel. But in terms of policy, we don't really know anything about the Empire except that they're all racist. Um, and it's a similar sort of situation with Galbatorix. Um, the interesting thing is though is everything was fairly peaceful in Elagacia up until Aragon found the dragon egg, and then the Varden started their campaign. Like Galbatorix wasn't even doing anything to the dwarves. He wasn't doing anything to the elves. He wasn't doing anything to the Urgles. I mean, he did before in the past. He did try to wipe out the Urgles, I think, is what it was. Um, and the Urgles wiped out half of his army. But the thing is that it was the same attitude that every character basically in the series had about Urgles up until later on. Every character was extremely racist to Urgles. And Aragon, too, he was extremely prejudiced against the Urgles. And, well, maybe not everybody would have slaughtered the Urgles. Everybody hated the Urgles, and they did not respect them, and they were basically the sworn enemy of everybody in Elagacia. So, Galbatorix's attitude of seeing them as enemies with no real chance of redemption, um, back in the past when he tried to wipe them out, it's not even an uncommon attitude. Now, is it a good thing to think? No, but it's no different from the heroes, is the point that I'm trying to get at. Just comparing the heroes to the villain in the story, it's like the trope in every story like this where the villain goes, "We're not so different, you and I." It just is, it's amusing when you look at the destruction that the rebels wrought and the cruel nature of some of the things they did. Now they're a bit better in principle. Their characters are better, well, in character. In that, a guy like Aragon will go around a city freeing slaves after fighting a battle, which is good. That's definitely good. And obviously in this story, the heroes are the heroes and the villain is the villain. The heroes are the, so to speak, good guys, and the villains are the badder guys. Obviously. That's the way that the story is written, and that's just the way things are. But also, if you just look at the story logically, you can't help but wonder, what's so bad, about the Empire that made all of this really happen? Like, how did this rebellion, how did it really come about where there was so many people willing to fight the Empire? How did that even happen in Star Wars? I still have no idea. Nobody has ever explained exactly how that happened. For Aragon, for Luke Skywalker, that makes sense because the Empire killed their families, basically, and ruined their home. And so it was a quest for vengeance. And so I guess I'm wondering, was it a quest for vengeance for everybody? But it doesn't seem like it was, and that doesn't seem like it would be logistically possible for every member of the army to have had their uncle or their dad or mom killed by the Empire. Um, and indeed, much of the story is dedicated to certain characters protesting against the idea of even fighting the Empire in the first place, such as many of the dwarves. And the elves stayed out of the fight for a really long time. And a lot of the people who are subjects of the Empire, humans, because of course they're subjects of the Empire, what are you going to do? You're in the Empire. They don't want to fight the Empire either. And the messed up thing is a lot of the people didn't even want to fight for the Empire. but they were forced to swear oaths of fealty to the villain Galbatorix in ancient language, so they had to fight for him. Which is really messed up. But the Varden, the rebels, do the same thing. I mean, not. It doesn't seem like they do it to people that don't volunteer, but still. Yeah, that is definitely messed up because then there's, you know, and it's messed up with the Varden too because they're just slashing people in half who really didn't want anything to do with the war at all. And, there's actually a section in the book where the elf Oromis and Aragon are talking about the ethics of fighting Galbatorix, and they're discussing the incredible loss of life and suffering that would be caused by the war. And Oromis basically asks Aragon to reason his way into having certainty that he must defeat Galbatorix, whatever the cost of this war. And Aragon has to think about it, and basically the reason ends up being is the reason that he justifies all of this violence that he enacts throughout this series is that the suffering that he causes will be less than whatever suffering that Galbatorix causes as long as he remains king over the centuries, maybe. And you have to wonder, that might not even be, that he might have been wrong. I just wonder, was Galbatorix's character actually improving? Because you have to think, in this dialogue, which the villainous king tried to have come about, where none of the heroic characters, by the way, wanted to participate. In this dialogue, he was trying to have a discussion with them about why they should join him and why he was in the right. And what the other characters could have done is they could have protested the specific ethical flaws and moral flaws of Galbatorix's character and the flaws in his policies. I just realized how much of a geek I sound like. But anyway, they could have started this discussion, maybe, and said to him, we wouldn't have rebelled against you if you didn't use the vile Razak and if you didn't have slavery and stuff like that. If you're such a noble, if your goals are so noble, so to make it so that the spellcasters and the magicians aren't as powerful as they would be otherwise, why don't you prove it and swear in the ancient language that you'll change these policies and you'll change for the better and you'll do things a certain way from now on, and then we'll join you and we'll stop fighting you. And also swear in the ancient language that you won't undo that oath by using the word of the ancient language to remove yourself from that oath. Like, that's all you have to do with him in that situation in the throne room. And if he's not willing to do that, well, you know for sure that he's the bad guy then. I mean, probably the most likely thing that would have happened is he would have said that, you're in no position to bargain. But they could have tried. And I think it's incredible that the heroes didn't try. And I guess that the thing that bothers me so much about this is that there's such a huge assumption that because things are painted well, I guess, that the heroes of this story were just obviously right and so obviously the ones that should be winning this, that there was no point in actually articulating why these characters were right to go about this. And it just kind of reminds me of people in the real world where they just think that they're so right that they can do whatever they want without any discussion about anything whatsoever, I guess. And sometimes people are right, and they should use their power. But I guess the problem is that we don't all have power and we're not all wise. And wow, that was thunder that landed very, very, very close to me outside. Anyway, I thought that the series was really good, and the parts that I remembered, such as Aragon's magical painting of Arya and his feelings for Arya, and of the dwarf city, and of Roran's conquests, like the moment where he fought or he killed almost 200 men. Um, the very ending scene where Aragon leaves the continent of Alagacia forever. I remembered the the elven city of Elismeria. Um, I don't remember. I don't think I remembered. I did not remember that there was the Dragon Gladiator. I did not remember the Eldunari. Um, I remembered Aragon learning his true name, and that stuck out to me. That always stuck out to me. Him learning his true name and that concept of everything in the ancient language having a true name and of people having their own true name. That concept, I've always loved that concept. And it was so cool. And it's like, what if in real life we all have true names that describe us perfectly? That would be so cool, but also terrifying. Anyway, I think I've gone on long enough.